Morning, Marlene. Good to see you. Yeah, hope you're well. And if I'm not mistaken, happy anniversary. If I'm not mistaken. Good. Morning, Christine. Good to see you. Morning, Marina. We are all well. I haven't been playing golf. Morning, great. I'm glad that I'm right. I hope you get spoiled lovely. Good morning, Maureen and Michael. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it's the Kirkhope's anniversary. So if you want to wish them happy anniversary. Great. Friends, this morning we're trialing some new software for our services. So if it's a bit glitchy and you're struggling a little, please write some comments in the bottom. But other than that, we'll see how it goes. Good morning, Mona and Pete. But yeah, so if it is a bit glitchy, just let us know. Morning, Nancy. And we'll go from there. If you have friends who want to watch on YouTube, they can now watch this on YouTube and Facebook at the same time. So hopefully it works out. Morning, Ewan and Ruth. Great. Well, it's 11 o'clock, friends, and good to be with you this morning. And just start with a couple of announcements. Firstly, thank you to Richard and his wonderful assistant, Samantha, aka Morag, for the beautiful music that they play. Morning, Jennifer and Bruce, and morning, Olive. And just if you would like to participate in the music, just let them know if you want any hymns. Morning, Betty, and they'll help with that. It's on Friday at 4 o'clock on the church Facebook page. Morning, Jenny. Then on Friday we have our quiz. Morning, Rena. I hope you're okay in down south. So Friday we have our quiz. If you want to join at that, it's at 8 o'clock on Friday. And if you want to participate and you struggle with the technology, just send me an email and I'll help you go through the technology so that on Friday that you can join and be part of the experience. And this week it's being run by the Mans family, so I can't see how that goes. Morning, Richard and Samantha. Then we have a new thing that's been going on that we started on Wednesday, and if you go to the Church of Abbots Hall Church on YouTube, you'll see that we've got a YouTube channel, and we've started something called Courageous Conversations. And what this is that you ask a question and a panel will sit down and just discuss it. It's anonymous and it's really, really great. So yes, so we go for that. So Courageous Conversations. Morning, Tom, and also Alan Morton. Good to see you, buddy. Yeah, so if you want to head over to YouTube as well, that you'll be able to see Courageous Conversations, and it's really interesting. The next one is not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about the racism, which is a bit of a hot topic at the moment. And so if you have any questions about racism or anything about the Bible and race, just send in the questions. You send them to me, it's anonymous, and we'll read them and discuss them. Then you will have noticed in the papers and on the news that there is going to be government guidelines on opening churches for private prayer. Uh, at the moment, we have not decided to do that. As far as this goes, we'll keep you informed if anything happens for private prayer. The reason is we're worried about infection rates and in Germany at the moment. There's the infection rates. They've discovered that there's been a lot of people that have caught COVID from going to church. So we're really worried about just spreading. And until we can put your safety first, we'll make a decision on that later. At present, the Church of Scotland has not issued any guidance, but just letting you know on that. So that's one thing. Please, again, keep an eye out for people in our community that are in need of help and in need of any form of care. That's part of being good neighbors. And also, if you are going for a walk and you happen to go past the church, please could you walk through the graveyard and have a look and make sure everything's okay from the outside. There's been reported cases of vandalism in some of the churches around Kirkcaldy. And so nothing at our church, but if you could just add, as part of your walk, just walk past and have a look. And if you could let us know. Morning, Anne. Great. And last, I have sad news to give you that Mary Ray, who was a member at Abbott's Hall, has passed away. So her funeral will be in a week and a bit's time. Good. So today's readings come from Matthew 28, 16 to 20. And it goes like this. It's called the Commissioning of the Disciples. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to you. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of age." The second reading is from Genesis 1. And for those of you who know me, you'll know that this is my favorite. But I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'm going to focus especially from verse 26. And so we've got the creation narrative, and 26 gets to mankind. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish and the seas, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." I don't know about you, or when I hear the word missionary, what image pops into your head? What image, when you hear the word missionary, pops into your head? Is it someone who goes into the deepest, darkest places and spreads the news? Is it normally a male? Is it normally someone who has a certain voice or a certain way of living, someone who can rough it, or someone who's not scared? Or maybe it's a person like this man. I don't know if you can see him. Oh. Well, that is, if I'm not mistaken, David Livingstone, I presume. Now, David Livingstone, for many of us, was seen as this great figure. In fact, if you go to Princess Street Gardens in Edinburgh, you have to look up into the air to look at his beautiful statue, don't you? Uh, and in the statue, we see a man of valor and a man who is courageous. And the myth and the story about him is big, isn't it? And how important he was. But it's recently come to people's attention that David Livingstone had a friend, and his friend's name was Horace Waller. And Horace, well, he really liked David. And so what he did is, when David Livingstone died, he took all his journals and he started to edit them. And he edited them so that all the good parts shone through, and well, all the bad parts, well, they sort of fell away. And recently, they discovered a letter that David Livingstone had written 150 years ago. And they were able, with science, to get the ink to come back because they'd used berries and stuff. And in this letter, well, they started to see that David Livingstone was not the myth that he was reported to be. In fact, he was actually quite a flawed character. It said that in this letter that he was incredibly competitive. And being competitive, David Livingstone would actually demean and say really ugly things about his the other explorers that were going around Africa trying to find their niche. And he was really ugly about them. And the other thing he wrote in this letter, there was a couple of things, but the other thing, he had a huge rage at his friends. He took rage at his friends because his friends had taken his children out of a school in England and moved them to abominable establishment in Scotland. So he was really flawed. He struggled to control his temper, and he struggled with his competitive nature, and so he was quite flawed. And if you start to dig through Livingstone's life a little bit, you'll start to see that, well, he also wasn't the best husband and father, because he put his family through hell, absolute hell. In fact, he took them further and further away from civilization into a context they had no idea. In fact, there was so much sickness that they got sick all the time. There was lack of food, so he made them eat locusts. And it was only after one of his children died, that he said to his wife Mary, who'd never lived in the UK, that she should go back with the children, and he would, and look after them. Now you can imagine Mary goes back to the UK, never been here, lived in Africa her whole life. She comes here and, well, she's lonely and her husband's away. And so she turned to the bottle and, well, she became an alcoholic. He then writes a letter telling her to come, leaving the children behind, and she dies in Africa from malaria. So he wasn't only flawed from just competitiveness, but he was also flawed as a family man. In fact, not only did he neglect his family by being not there, he neglected them because he had multiple affairs with women in Africa. He took the women who were native, and he just had their way and disposed of them. And then the other thing about Livingstone that's come to the fore is that although he fought against racism, slavery, he was a racist. In fact, he's quoted as saying, "Certain tribes in this land live the lowest form of barbarism. They possess neither courage, patriotism, natural affection, honor, or honesty." But he was a man of his time. Livingstone was a man of his time. He grew up in a culture that was racist. In fact, when he went up the Nile, in search of the Nile, the source of the Nile, he was believed to have died. And this is what the newspapers wrote about that moment, because they said in the Times, they said they disbelieved the Negro attendants were capable of returning his body. And in the Aberdeen Journal, they wrote, the Negroes of all savages, they show the least consideration for their dead comrades. And that was from a Christian community, a Christian country. The newspapers wrote that about black people. So why am I telling you this? Well, why this is interesting is that missionaries export their context. They export their culture, they export what's important to them, they export the values of the society they are part of. And Livingstone and all the missionaries that came after him and before him, well, they exported their culture to Africa. The good parts and the not so good parts, the racism and the sexism. And unfortunately, that still lives on today. For example, Africa is often called the dark continent, isn't it? And I took it for granted that it was called the dark continent. But when I moved to Scotland, I actually realized that the sun shines less here than it does in Africa. I mean, I struggle with the lack of sunlight, but yet Africa is known as the dark continent. And Scotland, well, the UK is known as the beacon of light. If you had to put a color to the word sin, what color would it be? My experience is that color is normally black. And if I asked you what color you would give with purity, you would probably say white. That's why brides get married in white and not black. A simple thing like that, simple thing on color, is being exported into cultures and into our language. And unfortunately, colonialism went in hand with the church. There's a saying in South Africa, and Desmond Tutu uses it quite often, that when white people landed in South Africa, they came with the Bible. So the white people had the Bible and the black people had the land. And when the whites said, let us pray, and everybody closed their eyes, when the black people opened their hands, they had the Bible and the whites had the land. And if you think that colonialism didn't export any of the British values, the first racial segregated law in South Africa was by Lord Shepstone, who was a governor in Natal. He was the first person to do that, and he was English or British. So he exported what was already happening in the culture that he lived in into South Africa. On the screen now is another picture. And you might notice that building. Let's see if I can get it open. There we go. And you might notice that building. That is in 1910. And that picture is from a missionary conference that happened in assembly halls in Edinburgh. And you'll see how packed it is in the rafters. But what makes it interesting is that's where the Church of Scotland has General Assembly every year. And that conference was designed at the height of for missionaries to go across the world. And in 1914, a missionary called Donald Fraser wrote this, and this is 4 years after this conference, wrote this. He says, blacks, sorry, having a problem with this. Ooh, here we go. He said, were savage people whose only hope of rescue lay in Christianity. Blacks were savage people whose only hope of rescue lay in Christianity. The prevailing context for missionaries was that they were superior, that they were better because they were British, and in so doing, their superiority was, well, because they were white. And they exported that idea all over. They exported it into Africa, they exported it out into South America, into Australia, into Asia, and they exported that idea that people were not of value unless they were British, or unless they were British, and in so being, they were white. And the way they did this was through schooling, where you could only speak English if you were a native. And we know what that's like in Scotland, because if you spoke Gaelic, it was shunned. They were told, people, that their local clothing was not of value. I was speaking to Emily this week about how a suit is actually a statement, an oppressive statement in certain cultures because of colonialism. Food, you could only eat certain food, what was acceptable and what was not. And culture, people's native culture was thrown away as not seen as important, because missionaries export their culture. The disciples were the first missionaries. They were sent to export a culture to the world. And so the question was, what were they going to export? Were they going to export what Jesus taught them? Or were they going to export hurt and hatred? Were they going to get their own back for all those who had hurt them in the past? Or were they going to show unity and reconciliation? The disciples had huge power at what message they would send. Were they going to send out condemnation or hate? Were they going to keep it only to the Jews, the people that were just like them? Or were they going to share it broadly? They had all these choices to make and how they were going to do it. And one of the first debates in the early church was whether people who were uncircumcised should be part of the church. Because what that is basically saying is, like, should people look like us? In order for people to follow Jesus, do they have to be like us and follow our customs, the way we speak, the way we understand God? Do we have to, is there place for other people? And they made a decision that it didn't matter if you were circumcised or not. The disciples discovered, as they were sharing this message, that the highest value for them was not their ethnicity or where they'd come from. Their highest value was that they were people made in the image of God. That, as Genesis says, that all people, black, white, Jew, Gentile, Roman, whatever your classification, whatever it is, all people are made in the image of God. Educated, non-educated, all people, male, female, all, and all, capital ALL, all people are made in the image of God, and all people are worthy of love. All people have value. That was their underlying value. It wasn't like the early British thing where if you were white or you had British roots or you looked British, that was the highest value. For these disciples, the highest value was that all people were loved and cherished by God. These disciples were exporting love. They weren't exporting domination. They were exporting hope, not fear. They were exporting grace, not condemnation. The disciples were not scared of other people because all people were valuable. Jesus was there for all people, not just a select few. So what does that mean for us today? Well, I am a firm believer that each one of us is a missionary. We are all telling a story about who God is. We're all going out into the world and telling the story about what God is doing in our lives and sharing that with others. And we might not physically use our words. We might not go up to someone and say, do you know these things about God? But our actions, well, they are important. There's the old St. Francis saying is that preach the gospel at all times, and if necessarily, use words. And so preaching or missionaries is naturally part of what we are, because we're sharing the good news with people. But the big question for me is, what culture do we export with that message? Because just like the previous missionaries of the UK, we are not immune to our context. There are those of us who believe, or all people believe, or we believe as a community, that all people are equal, that all are made in the image of God. But does that include people that don't look like us? Is it people who might think differently from us? Is it people who might not be from the same church as us? Is it people who don't even go to church? All people are created in the image of God. Do we believe that? And if we believe that all people are made in the image of God like the disciples did, are we fighting the injustices of our world? Or are we keeping silent? Are we fighting the injustices that have happened to women? Are we fighting the injustices that have happened to Black lives? Are we fighting the injustices that are happening to ethnic minorities? Because if we say people or all lives matter, that all people have value, well then we should be living that. It's easy to say that we are opposed to racism when it happens in America. It's easy, but yesterday, a group of Black people, wrong one, group of Black people stood outside many places in the UK and said that they have experienced racism in the UK. Are we going to listen to them and call out the racism in our community as well? Or are we going to turn our backs? Because if we believe that all lives are made in the image of God, when we see people suffer, we need to listen. We need to root out the racism in our own community as well. One of the things where I saw racism and xenophobia particularly, and I don't really care which way you voted in the EU referendum, that doesn't bother me. But the way people were blamed and they were stereotyped. Those lazy people that come and take our jobs, or those lazy people, or those mass murderers that are coming from Poland You know, the words that were used as xenophobic attacks on people that were not British was horrendous. As Christians, we believe all lives matter. But if you believe as a culture, if your culture believes that you are more valuable than others, then we need to fight that, not go along with it. So here's the hard part, friends. Here's the hard part. Some people will be racist in the name of God and hold the Bible in their hands. And our job is to call it out and say we will not be like that. Some people will hurt in the name of God and oppress in the name of God, and we cannot allow that. We cannot allow it. But the other hard part is this. Sometimes we do not know our own prejudices. We don't. I mean, sometimes we don't know the things that we're exporting. We don't. So it is important that we listen to those around us, that we listen to those who are not like us, those who are saying, you know, we cannot go on this way. We need to listen to the voices of those people who have marched and said, we feel that, and we've experienced oppression by the color of our skin. We need to hear that. We need to also allow criticism. We need to allow people to criticize us. We are very afraid of criticism. Allow criticism. Allow people to say things that are hard for us to hear. And also to allow people to use their own language. There's a huge thing at the moment. People have been holding up this Black Lives Matter, and the counter argument is that, no, but surely all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter, but at this place, there's an inequality. Let people say what they need to say in the language that they need to say it in. Then we need to repent. If someone tells us something, that we are hurting them, that our society that we've created is hurting, we need to turn. We need to go the other way. And maybe, just maybe, we will discover that they are offering us a new form of salvation. Because as the old Celtic saying goes, often, Christ is found in the stranger's guise. Thanks be to God. Friends, it's been a joy sharing with you today. If you would like a chat or if you need anything, please do not hesitate to contact me. We're here for each other, and just know that I'm here for you too. May God hold you and keep you. If you feel like you do not have value, may today be one where you realize that you matter to God. And if people have hurt you in the past, raise your voice. And the blessing of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit remain with you all, now and forevermore. Amen.